Hello, and welcome to Speak English with Olly. Today, we will explore one of the most famous mysteries in history, Jack the Ripper, the serial killer of London. This story is long, full of details, and sometimes dark, but it is told slowly and clearly. Listening to this episode can help you understand English better, improve your vocabulary, and practice your listening skills. We will travel back to London in 1888, walk through the foggy streets of Whitechapel, and meet the people who lived there. You will hear about the victims, the fear in the city, the police investigation, and the mystery that still has not been solved. So, sit back, relax, and let us begin the story of Jack the Ripper. London, 1888. The city was alive with noise, smoke, and shadows. In the East End, in a place called Whitechapel, life was hard. The streets were crowded with small houses, narrow alleys, and gas lamps that gave only a weak light. At night, the fog from the River Thames often covered the roads, making it difficult to see. Whitechapel was a poor area. Many people had no work. Families lived in tiny rooms. Some women walked the streets to earn money, because there was no other way to survive. It was a place of hunger, struggle, and fear. It was in this setting that a mystery began. A series of crimes that would shock the world. A name that would never be forgotten. Jack the Ripper. The story starts not with the man himself, we do not know who he was, but with the women whose lives ended on those streets. Their names are often lost in the shadow of the killer, but remembering them is important. They were real people living in difficult times. As night fell in Whitechapel, danger moved silently through the fog, and soon the city would wake to terrible news. On the morning of August 31st, 1888, the people of Whitechapel woke to a terrible discovery. In a dark street called Buck's Row, a woman's body was found lying on the ground. Her name was Mary and Nichols, but many people called her Polly. She was 43 years old. Life had not been kind to her. She had no steady home, no regular job, and she often spent her nights walking the streets, looking for a little money to pay for food or a place to sleep. That night, Polly was seen leaving a lodging house. She did not have the money to pay for a bed. She said she would find it before the night was over. She stepped into the London fog, not knowing that it would be her last night alive. When her body was discovered, the police and neighbors gathered quickly. The scene shocked them. Her throat had been cut, and her body showed terrible injuries. It was clear that this was no simple robbery. It was something darker, something cruel. The newspapers soon wrote about the murder. They described the poor streets of Whitechapel, the danger at night, and the mystery of who could do such a thing. For many readers, this was the first time they truly saw how hard life in the East End was. But the murder of Mary and Nichols was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, more women would die in the same brutal way. The city would be filled with fear, and the name of the killer, though still unknown, would spread through every home in London. Only a few days after the murder of Mary and Nichols, another woman was killed. Her name was Annie Chapman. She was 47 years old. Like Polly, she lived in poverty. On the night of September 8, 1888, Annie was seen outside a lodging house. She too did not have money for a bed. She told the others, "I will soon find it." Those were her last known words. In the early hours of the morning, Annie's body was found in the yard behind a house on Hanbury Street. The injuries were even more brutal than those of Mary and Nichols. It was clear to everyone now. London had a killer who was not only dangerous, but also filled with a strange cruelty. The people of Whitechapel were terrified. Women who worked at night feared to step into the streets. Families locked their doors as soon as the sun went down. Some men even walked their wives and sisters to safety, afraid that they might become the next victim. The police tried to find answers. They asked questions in the neighborhoods, they looked for suspects, and they studied the crime scenes. But there were no clear clues. The killer seemed to appear and disappear like a shadow in the fog. Meanwhile, the newspapers were full of stories. They used large, dramatic titles to sell more copies. They wrote about a monster in London and the Whitechapel murders. With each new headline, fear and curiosity grew stronger. London had seen crime before, but this was different. This was not a simple thief or a man of anger. This was someone who hunted carefully, who planned his acts, and who seemed to enjoy causing fear. The people began to whisper a name that would soon become famous. Jack the Ripper. On the night of September 30th, 1888, London saw something even more shocking. Not one, but two women were killed in the same night. People later called it the double event. The first woman was Elizabeth Stride. She was 44 years old and came from Sweden. Elizabeth had lived in London for many years, working hard but often struggling to survive. That night, she was seen near a small yard called Berner Street. Later, her body was discovered there. Her throat had been cut, but her body was not as badly injured as the others before her. Some people believed the killer had been interrupted and had to escape quickly. Less than an hour later, another murder took place. This time, the victim was Catherine Eddowes, 46 years old. She had been taken to a police station earlier that night because she was drunk. After a few hours, she was released. Sadly, she walked into the foggy streets alone. Her body was found in a dark corner of the city, and the injuries were terrible. This was the most violent attack yet. 2 murders in one night. The city of London was in shock. Panic spread through the East End. People no longer felt safe even in groups. Women avoided the streets after sunset, and the police were under heavy pressure. Newspapers rushed to report the story. For the first time, the name Jack the Ripper appeared in a letter sent to the police and then printed in the press. The letter was signed with that name, and soon everyone in London was using it. Whether the letter was real or just a trick, no one knew. But the name stayed, and it gave the killer a dark kind of fame. By now, London understood that these crimes were not random. They were the work of one person, someone who knew the streets, moved silently, and left behind no clear trace. And the murders were not over yet. On the morning of November 9th, 1888, London woke to the most shocking murder of all. The victim was Mary Jane Kelly, a young woman of about 25 years old. She was different from the other victims in one important way. She had a small room of her own, in a place called Miller's Court, off Dorset Street in Whitechapel. Mary Jane was said to be cheerful and kind, though she lived in poverty, like the others. On the night before her death, she was seen by friends and neighbors. Some said she sang songs in her room late into the night. Others believed they saw her with a man. But by morning, the singing had stopped, and silence had filled Miller's Court. When her landlord's assistant came to collect rent, no one answered the door. He looked through the window, and what he saw was so terrible that he called the police at once. Inside, Mary Jane Kelly's body was found on her bed. The injuries were far worse than any of the other murders. The killer had taken his time, hidden by the walls of her small room. For many people, this was the darkest moment of the whole case. News of Mary Jane Kelly's death spread quickly through London. If the people of Whitechapel had felt fear before, Now they felt horror. Some wondered if the murders would ever end. Others believed the killer would soon strike again. But strangely, after Mary Jane Kelly, the murders seemed to stop. The shadow that had haunted Whitechapel for months disappeared into the fog. The police still searched, the newspapers still wrote, but no more women were killed in the same way. The mystery of Jack the Ripper only grew deeper. After the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the police worked harder than ever to catch Jack the Ripper. The streets of Whitechapel were filled with fear, and the public demanded answers. The police interviewed hundreds of people. They spoke with neighbors, landlords, workers, and anyone who might have seen something unusual. They even questioned doctors and butchers because the killer seemed to have some knowledge of cutting with skill. Posters were placed around the city asking for information. Rewards were offered to anyone who could give a clue that would lead to the murderer. But still, nothing clear was found. Letters also began to arrive. Some were sent to the police, others to newspapers. Most of them were probably jokes or cruel tricks, written by people who wanted attention. But a few stood out. The most famous was the Dear Boss letter, signed with the name Jack the Ripper. This was the first time that name appeared, and soon the whole world was using it. Another letter, called the From Hell letter, came with a small piece of human kidney, which made it even more disturbing. Despite all these efforts, the police could not catch the killer. The foggy streets, the crowded alleys, and the fear of witnesses staying silent all helped the murderer escape. The newspapers criticized the police harshly. They said the officers were too slow, too confused, and unable to protect the poor people of Whitechapel. This anger only grew stronger with each murder. Meanwhile, theories began to spread. Who could Jack the Ripper be? Some said he was a poor man from the slums. Others believed he was a doctor, a foreigner, or even a member of the upper class hiding among the poor. But the truth remained hidden. The more the police searched, the more the killer seemed like a ghost, appearing only to take lives, then vanishing back into the shadows of London. As the murders continued, the question on everyone's mind was the same. Who was Jack the Ripper? The police, the newspapers, and even ordinary people on the streets all had their own theories. Some ideas were wild, others more serious, but none could be proven. One of the first suspects was a man named Montague John Druitt, a young lawyer and teacher. He was found dead in the River Thames in December 1888, not long after the last known murder. Some people thought his death was a suicide, and they believed he may have killed himself because he was guilty. But there was no real evidence, only rumors. Another name was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who lived in Whitechapel. He was known to have mental health problems, and he was sometimes violent. Some police officers believed strongly that he was the Ripper, but again, the evidence was weak, and nothing could be proven. A more unusual suspect was Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria. A rumor spread that he might have been involved, or that the royal family was hiding the truth. Most historians today believe this was only a story invented by the press, but at the time, it captured people's imagination. There were also doctors on the list of suspects. Because of the way the victims were cut, many believed the killer must have had medical knowledge. One such suspect was Dr. Thomas Cream, who had poisoned several women. Another was Sir William Gull, a respected royal doctor, accused in conspiracy theories of helping to hide the crimes. The newspapers printed these theories one after another, often without much proof. This made the mystery even more dramatic and frightening. People whispered about their neighbors, suspicious strangers, and anyone who seemed unusual. But with every new suspect, the same problem remained. There was never enough evidence. The police had no fingerprints, no photographs, and no modern science to help them. All they had were witnesses who often disagreed, and crimes committed in darkness. And so Jack the Ripper stayed a shadow. Each theory gave hope that the truth might be near, but the truth always slipped away. The killer remained nameless, faceless, and free. While the police searched for the killer, everyday life in Whitechapel carried on, but under a heavy shadow of fear. The murders did not only shock the city, they also revealed the terrible poverty and suffering of the East End. The streets were overcrowded. Thousands of people lived in small, dirty rooms. Many families shared one bed, and some had no bed at all. Lodging houses were full of men and women who paid a few pennies each night to sleep on a hard wooden bench or on the floor. The smell of smoke, alcohol, and sickness filled the air. Work was hard to find. Factories and docks sometimes hired men for a day, and then sent them away with no promise of tomorrow. Women often cleaned houses, washed clothes, or sold flowers and food on the streets. But for many, there was no steady job and hunger was common. In these conditions, crime grew easily. Theft, violence, and drunken fights happened every night. The police already struggled to control the area, even before Jack the Ripper appeared. When the murders began, Whitechapel became known as one of the most dangerous places in London. For the women who worked on the streets, fear became part of their lives. Many had no choice but to keep going out at night, even though they knew the killer might be waiting. A few tried to stay in groups, but poverty often forced them to walk alone. People warned each other about strange men, but no one knew who could be trusted. The newspapers painted Whitechapel as a place of hopelessness and horror. They described it as a world separate from the rest of London, a dark maze of alleys, smoke, and misery. Readers from wealthier parts of the city were shocked, but also strangely fascinated by these reports. For the first time, the suffering of the poor was being printed on every front page. The murders of Jack the Ripper did more than spread fear. They opened the eyes of many people to the reality of poverty in London. Politicians and reformers began to talk about improving housing, cleaning the streets, and offering better help to the poor. In this way, the crimes changed not only Whitechapel, but also the way the whole city thought about its poorest citizens. But for the people living there in 1888, change was slow. And as long as the killer was free, the fear never left. Each night, the gas lamps lit the narrow alleys, the fog rolled in from the river, and the shadow of Jack the Ripper seemed to move through the darkness. After the murder of Mary Jane Kelly in November 1888, the killings seemed to stop. The police waited, the newspapers waited, and the people of Whitechapel lived in fear of the next crime. But no more murders came in the same brutal way. Why did they end? No one knows for certain. Some believe the killer died or was sent to prison for another crime. Others think he may have left London or simply chose to stop. The truth has never been discovered. Over time, the case of Jack the Ripper became one of the most famous mysteries in the world. Writers, historians, and detectives have studied it for more than 130 years. Books, films, and documentaries continue to ask the same question. Who was Jack the Ripper? Many suspects have been named, and new theories are still created even today. Yet none of them can be proven with absolute certainty. The killer's identity remains hidden, lost in the fog of Victorian London. But the story of Jack the Ripper is not only about the killer. It is also about the women whose lives ended in those dark streets. Mary and Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. They lived difficult lives in poverty, and their deaths forced London to look at the suffering of the poor. In this way, their story still matters. And so, the tale of Jack the Ripper ends not with answers but with questions. A shadow that walked through Whitechapel, unseen yet unforgettable. A name that became a legend, even though the person behind it remains unknown. More than a century later, the mystery continues. And perhaps that is why we still speak of Jack the Ripper today. Not only because of the horror of his crimes, but because of the questions that will never truly be solved. Thank you for watching this episode of Speak English with Olly. Remember, learning from history helps us stay aware, think carefully, and make better choices. If you enjoyed this episode, you can practice your English by listening again and learning new words from the story. Stay curious, stay safe, and see you in the next episode.